Let me say that again. We are recording. We are so glad that you are here this evening, and we want to thank Abba for creating Covenant Calendar Club and the restoration of all things. We pray that you'll be richly blessed out of the word of the Torah and out of the mouth of our teachers this evening. But before we get started, we'd like to give a greeting and a warm shout out to those that are viewing this on YouTube. So can we take just a minute, everyone, unmute your mics, and let's just shout out a shalom blessing. Blessings, everyone.
Shalom.
Glad you're here.
Blessings to
Everybody.
Hallelujah.
Welcome.
We are truly glad that you're here. And if you'd like to participate in or with Covenant Calendar Club and our discussions afterwards, you can view studythecalendar.com and hook up right from there. So with that being said, let's go ahead and turn the camera over to Tim Ashelford, who's going to be our instructor for this evening, in addition to the Ruach HaKodesh, of course.
Yeah, well said, Mario. Well said. Thanks, Mario. Appreciate this. Welcome, everybody. It's going to be an interesting one tonight. This is very exciting for me. Stacy, I want to thank you very much for the prayer. I do appreciate that. Charlene, I want to thank you. This is the end of the slide. I got to back this up. Charlene, I got to thank you for all the work that you have done. It's an incredible amount of work, and I greatly, greatly appreciate it. This is part 2, and we're going to do a very, very, very small little bit of review, and then we're going to jump right into it. It's I'm looking forward to this in a big way. This study is so invigorating for me when I go through it. It just sends chills down my spine. And this is the basic pre-summary from part 1. Yahuwah's requirements thus far. Number 1, enter the land. Number 2, observe Passover, and that would be Abib 14. Cut the first wheat, the wave sheaf offering. That's Abib 15. Roast and grind wheat. Prepare a flour and oil mixture, and that would most certainly be fine flour as recorded in the scriptures, or as required, I should say. Number 5, present the ascent offering by fire to Yahuwah. And that ascent is emphasized for a very special reason. Number 6, break bread dough for normal consumption, bake bread dough for normal consumption. And number 7, eat the grain of the land. Only after the wave sheaf and the ascension offerings had been presented was it acceptable to Yahuwah to consume the first grain of the land. Joshua 5:11. And they ate. Very important words. The order of events for Yahusha's crucifixion. So we have the Passover, and that is in the midst of the week. That's when the crucifixion was, and that's in Abib 14. Abib 15 is the first Shabbat of unleavened bread. The 16th is prepare for Shabbat. And Abib 17 is the 7th day Sabbath, the resurrection, and the 4th watch with Miriam. Now, this is why we're looking at this. Number 5. This is the wave sheaf at dawn. This is the topic of the day right now. The wave sheaf at dawn, the first cycle after the 7th day Sabbath. Yahusha ascends to his Father to fulfill the wave sheaf first fruit offering. And there's the 21st. That is the second unleavened bread Shabbat. Passover festival ends right there. And we look on the 24th. That is the next 7th day Sabbath outside of the Passover festival. And the 25th of the month is the first cycle outside of Passover festival. That is the first cycle of the week outside of the Passover festival. This date will be investigated next, the 26th. The 26th is a very controversial number, and you're going to be hearing a lot about that in this study. Number 5, again, Yahusha's wave sheaf and ascension was at dawn, the first cycle after the seventh day Sabbath. Adding in Enoch's wave sheaf information. This is some thoughts to question. Number 9 on your right-hand side. The second cycle is a Monday, and it is outside of the Passover festival, and that is the 26th of Abib, right there. If Enoch has a true calendar, does Yahusha still have to request a 9-cycle extension so he could offer himself as another first fruit offering from death on Enoch 26th date of the month? Note, during Yahusha's Passion Week, this is a Monday, the second cycle of the week. How is this in alignment with the Enoch calendar that submits the wave sheaf must be on a Sunday, the 26th, and not Monday, the 26th? Just to show a little bit of there's some confusion in the Enoch calendar here. And we're going to be looking at this a bit deeper, quite a bit deeper, actually. Yahusha's antitype, is it based on Enoch's sickle? Very good question. The answer is going to be seen coming up. And here in part 2, this is the mapping of the discussion of the topics. Slides 2 to 11, we're going to see the review of part number 1 and the introduction for part number 2, section 3. What about the manna? Very good question. I think there's going to be a few surprises in this section. Section 4, the condition of Enoch's bread offering. And 4.1, divine life of the wave sheaf bread. And section 5, Yahusha and the wave sheaf placement. Was it Torah or Enoch? And then section 5.1, Yahusha, the perfect first fruit offering. Passover, wave sheaf, and unleavened bread. Okay, here's a bit of a review, and here's more on Enoch's wave sheaf date. And if you look in that square box, you'll see it says the first month, the 26th of the month, which they name it first fruits, the waving of the sheaf offering. The wave sheaf was to be offered on the 26th of the first month, and this is every year, period. It does not change in the Enoch and Zadok calendars. We're going to look and see if this is scriptural. Here's our introduction. Under Moses, only 2 Passovers were celebrated. There was likely no grain in the desert those 40 years. Just imagine what it must have been like to finally smell the new grain and touch it. One of my favorite aromas is at fall time when you see all the combines going through the fields and there's lots of dust in the air. That is such a beautiful aroma. I absolutely, the smell of harvest time. It's fabulous. In Egypt, unleavened bread was to be eaten with the Passover meal. Some feel Joshua allowed the people to process the old grain in order to have unleavened bread for the Passover meal, saving the new grain for the wave sheaf. Is this so? We're going to have a look at this, and I think we'll be able to answer that quite clearly. Remember the command of Leviticus 23:14. And you, what? Do not eat 1, bread, 2, roasted grain, 3, fresh grain. This command includes old and new grain, barley and wheat. So on their Passover, they had manna for Passover. One more time for Joshua. Section number 3. just when did the manna cease? And this is some more review. Israel enjoys the grain. And they ate of the stored grain of the land on the morrow after the Pesach, unleavened bread and roasted grain on the same day. And that day would be Abib 15, that is the first convocation of unleavened bread. John 5:12. Now we're wondering when the manna stopped. Let's read it. And the manna ceased on the day after they had eaten of the stored grain of the land. And the children of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate the food of the land in Canaan that year. So the manna ceased on the day after they ate the grain. For Israel, who ate the grain of the land on Abib 15, there would be no reason to look for manna on Abib 16, the second cycle of the week. What about Enoch's calendar? Do you remember Enoch's quote? The first of the month, or the first month, the 20th of the month, was his first fruits and the waving of the sheaf offering, according to Enoch. The cycle harvest, as claimed by Enoch's calendar, asserts the wave sheaf offering of first fruits, or the cow to the Shavuot, cannot be performed until Abib 26, hungry or not. And that word hungry has high importance. We're going to be looking at this. While Joshua was quite able to fulfill the Torah's requirements concerning the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the rules of Enoch's calendar would have prevented Joshua from obedience to Yahuah, causing everyone to sin as well. And the question, how hungry would they have been having to wait till Abib 26 to eat and enjoy any of the harvest? They would have been hungry, in my estimation. This is Enoch's dilemma, not Joshua's. Enoch's harvest could not begin until Abib 26. Enoch's people could not eat any grain until the Abib 26 harvest begins. And we read in that verse that they're not to eat any grain whatsoever. So what is Enoch going to do between the time that Joshua ate the grain on the 15th of Abib and Abib 26? Where is Enoch going to get his food to feed people? Enoch could not eat unleavened bread as commanded by Yahuah during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Why? Because there was no grain and no manna. Why no grain? Because Yahuah had commanded that the grain was not to be eaten until the wave sheaf was performed. And Enoch says that can't happen until the 26th. So there was no grain to be eaten, and yet Joshua ate the grain on Abib 15 and the manna stopped afterwards. So there was no grain and no manna for Enoch. Enoch could only claim Abib 15 for eating manna. Then what? Hunger? Would that be one day of Feast of Unleavened Manna for unleavened bread? Remember, on Abib 16 is when the manna stopped. It just didn't show up. So there is your one day that Enoch could have eaten manna for unleavened bread. Does Enoch believe that people should have been tempted by Yahuah to abstain from the coveted grain, which they had not eaten for 40 years, for 11 more days before they could begin Enoch's harvest and satisfy their hunger? How many statutes have been broken thus far? Section number 4. If Joshua observed the wave sheaf festival according to Enoch's calendar, what would be the condition of the bread if not offered until Abib 26? And more specifically, what kind of problem will this create? We know there was a restriction for eating grain of any kind until after the wave sheaf had been presented. That's why Joshua performed the wave sheaf according to statute, so they could eat the first batch of bread dough on Abib 15, and that would be the morrow after the seventh-day Sabbath, or the Shabbat. The people were then allowed to freely use the grain of the land, only after the wave sheaf ceremony had been performed first. Note, Yahuah stipulated by statute the wave sheaf ceremony must occur on the first cycle of the week, the day after the seventh-day Sabbath. And here's a surprise. Enoch does abide by this stipulation with Joshua and Torah truth to some degree. There's your Shabbat. There is the wave sheaf. Enoch declares it to be on the first day after the seventh-day Sabbath. However, there is another problem to consider. What is the difference between Enoch and Joshua? It's the difference between a date and or a day. Those are two very, very distinguished, separate identities. And this is the difference, and it becomes brutally important to understand the difference. A date and or a day are usually not the same. Here's a random example. The 15th day of the first month is not always on a fifth cycle or a Wednesday, like it is on Enoch's calendar. Joshua knew Torah's wave sheaf was always on the day after the 7676 Shabbat, whatever date that may be. Enoch demands that his wave sheaf ceremony must be on a certain date. And that's in opposite to Yahuah's command for a day. Enoch commands a date. That date being the 26th of the first month. Let's see how it plays out. The Enoch calendar claims the wave sheaf must be performed on Abib 26, not on any other date. Therefore, if Enoch follows the Torah guidelines, no grain can be touched until the Abib 26 wave sheaf. I'm going to read that one more time. If Enoch follows the Torah guidelines, no grain can be touched until the Abib 26 wave sheaf. Does this mean that Joshua broke the Torah statute by defiantly eating the grain of the land on Abib 15? Was Joshua really supposed to store a portion of the first batch of dough until Abib 26? Enoch, are you paying attention? And that would be 11 cycles later to honor Enoch's wave sheaf ceremony. And yes, we need to question this. That is the question, a huge discrepancy between Enoch and the scriptures. Number 4.1, divine life of the wave bread, wave sheaf bread. Would it really be acceptable to offer Yahuah bread dough that was 11 days old? That's a pretty interesting picture on the right of all the moldy bread. Or did Joshua perform a second wave sheaf ceremony so there could be acceptable bread? Where would that scripture be? Is there any place in scripture where we find a second wave sheaf offering? I haven't found one myself. And what is with these 11 days? Also, we must remember, Leviticus 23:13, that the oil mixed with flour is a dough, a moist dough. It is not dry bread, moist dough in desert heat. Where do we see scriptural authority for Joshua's actions? Where is it written? And there's 4 witnesses, Leviticus 23, verse 10 to 13, Numbers 15, verses 19 to 21, and Deuteronomy 18, 3 and 4, and chapter 26, 1 and 2. There's where you'll find the witnesses to Joshua's actions. And here's a little bit more review. Israel cleared to eat, and you do not eat bread or roasted grain or fresh grain until the same day that you have brought an offering to your Elohim. See, it's done consecutively on the exact same day. It cannot be divided apart, not according to the scriptures. The wave sheaf statute requirements before eating the grain of the land were accomplished, granting permission for the Israelites to eat the grain of the land on the same day. The very first batch of bread dough. Joshua observed Passover, and that's on Abib 15. The very first batch of bread dough had been presented to Yahuah. That would have been in the morning. Then they ate bread on the same day, the day after the 7676 Shabbat Passover. The wave sheaf had been presented according to statute. There is no provision for a second wave sheaf ceremony according to Torah. Abib 26 is a counterfeit from the Enoch calendar. These scriptures tell us unequivocally that presenting the wave sheaf and eating of the grain of the land must be done consecutively and on the same day. That's exactly what Joshua did on Abib 15. Enoch claims the wave sheaf and eating of the bread is only performed on Abib 26. How can this same day be both Abib 15 and 26? What that amounts to is we're going to have to decide who we're going to follow, either Joshua or Enoch. That's actually what it really boils down to. Remember, Joshua declares by Torah statute, Abib 15 is always the unleavened bread festival. When the wave sheaf is also on Abib 15, the unleavened bread festival is always celebrated after the wave sheaf festival. Cutting grain and baking bread and eating. Joshua's duty, number one, was the wave sheaf. That's the premier duty right there. The wave sheaf was first. Number two, the bread dough from the first grain offering, and then eat bread on Abib 15. Did Joshua ignore the same day clause to align the Hebrew nation with the Enoch calendar? No. The first portion of the cut grain supplied the required offering, allowing the baking and eating on Abib 15, exactly as recorded in the scriptures. Does Enoch's calendar demand that a portion of this first bread dough must be retained for 11 cycles to offer on Abib 26? There is your 11 cycles. That is the difference between Joshua and Enoch's calendar. Those are the 11 cycles that we're talking about. Do the scriptures endorse 11-day-old bread? Or will Yahuah accept bread 11 cycles old? 1 Chronicles 9:32 confirms Yahuah's statute of limitations for the sanctuary set-apart bread was 7 cycles. The new showbread was to be prepared every Shabbat to replace the former 7-cycle-old showbread. That's seen in Leviticus 24:8. So there is the limitation that we find in the scriptures, 7 cycles only. And yet it appears like Enoch needed a lot more than 7 cycles. Is it reasonable that Yahuah would accept 11-cycle-old stale and or moldy bread dough as the wave sheaf offering? Remember, Bread dough is moist and very prone to mold in a warm climate. Here's some truth. Enoch rightly places the unleavened bread festival on Abib 15 to 21. Now, the huge Enoch dilemma. Number one, Abib 15 is the last day the manna is given, and you can read that in Joshua 5:12. The second big problem, Enoch always places wave sheaf on Abib 26. In this case, 11 days late. Another problem, number three, according to Torah, the grain of the land cannot be touched for any reason until after the wave sheaf ceremony. Number four, how is Enoch supposed to celebrate the Feast of Unleavened Bread? And in it, you would be eating unleavened bread from Abib 15 to 21 as one of the statutes. And how would Enoch not be in violation of cutting the grain before the wave sheaf cycle? How can Enoch eat unleavened bread if he was not to touch the grain? Or not to eat it before the wave sheaf festival? How is that supposed to be done? Seems like a pretty extreme contradiction in terms and commands. Number five dilemma. Is Enoch truthfully fulfilling the Torah type in preparation for the antitype, which represents the first heavenly ascension of Yahusha? We're going to look at this a lot closer later on, and we're going to have a look very close. Section number 5. Did Yahusha observe the wave sheaf first fruit requirements according to Enoch calendar stipulations? Here's a very important note. This section will have Abib calendar slides for Joshua, Yahusha, and Enoch. And note this, a similar slide will return at the end of this study, and it will be a conclusive slide. So the answers that you're going to see here in the next few slides, we're going to see together at the end of the study. 1450 BC, Joshua's Passover, 7th cycle. And you see over here, I hope you can see my cursor, there's the 7th day Sabbath, and here is the 14th of Abib. This is where Joshua's Passover was. We come over here, there's the 15th. This is on the first cycle of the week after the 7th day Sabbath. This is the first Shabbat convocation of unleavened bread, and it is also the wave sheaf presentation on the exact same day. Torah dates are flexible. If you have a Passover on a first cycle, the wave sheaf will be on a first cycle. If you have Passover on a second cycle, the wave sheaf will also be on a first